So the agenda that I came up with was that we would just sort of introduce statement writing in terms of like what role it really plays in an application and what you should have in mind when writing those. Um, Talking a lot about understanding prompts and trying to see how a prompt looks like to a reviewer. So translating what you see into how it's actually evaluated. Um, General tips on writing statements, and then talking about revising essays, because that's always how the best essays are made. It's through a long revision process. So at a high level, I think it's always really important to remember the role of your statement in an application, because you always have like other parts of it, and you want to make sure that your statement is complementing CVs, resumes, transcripts, references, things like that, in a way that sort of can highlight some of those things, but is not like overly repetitive in terms of just like writing out your CV in like paragraph format. Like that would not be a useful statement. And so when I think about statements, I always think of them as being sort of your opportunity to add some color, add some flair, talk about yourself, and use it also as sort of a persuasive thing, right? To make the case for why you're a good candidate for this application, or whatever the application may be for, right? So showing them who you are, so that sort of adding that in flair and narrative and personal aspect to it, and then making your case is really what I always think of with these statements. And so this workshop is designed sort of to be pretty general when we're talking about like statements. And so I feel like there's kind of a few different types of statements. There's like a personal statement, which I think is the most common one, especially, you know, early undergrad and things during undergrad. So really this is like, who are you? What are your values? Like what's your motivation and passion for this opportunity or the field, and how will this sort of advance that, and then how also are you going to contribute to whatever opportunity you're part of, right? So I think a lot of times we think about like REUs, for example, Andy, like they want to develop, it's always like these small cohorts of students, right, that are together in an internship. And so it's like, what are you going to bring to the table that's going to enrich that experience for everyone else in that program as a whole, right? I think also, if you all are thinking about grad school, these sort of research statements, you'll often hear them called like statement of purpose, or called like statement of objectives. These are a little more targeted in terms of often being more research focused and requiring you to think more deeply about like what specifically it is you want to research and how you're going to do that and how you're prepared. All right, we just got started.
These slides will be
They will, yeah. So there'll be slides, there'll be a recording. So I think it's on here. You don't have to write down unless you really want to. And these are sort of broad categories. And like, for example, for grad school, I have to write both of these. But I think often you'll see them combined into one sometimes too, especially for things at the undergrad level. So they want to know about you and also your academic preparation, sort of all at one. And also note that when you're applying for things right now, often you'll be required to write a cover letter. And I think a lot of what we're talking about today is also germane to those, right? They're gonna be a little more, a little different in terms of their formatting, but you're still gonna wanna bring a lot of the same elements that we're talking about today. Any questions so far? Okay. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was understanding the prompts and trying to understand how you're going to be evaluated, because that's going to really influence what you're going to use, the limited space you have, that character, that word limit for in that essay. And so when I think about prompts, I was thinking about, you know, this is sort of your little window into what the reviewers are going to get. And so you need to make sure that when you get that prompt, you can translate it in a way so you can figure out what are all the things that they're looking for, and you can make sure you hit all those things while still maintaining this view of like talking about yourself, and really making it personalized, while still making sure that you address or describe those experiences in a way that hits all of their boxes, right? And so prompts are going to come in a lot of different flavors in terms of what they look like and how detailed they are, right? So I just pulled like 3 examples to show you guys. So like Friday Harbor has an REU. This was their prompt, and it is extremely vague, right? It's like 2 statements, put them both in one box, and tell us who you are, what you've accomplished, and then tell us who you want to be and how you want to get there, right? So this is like a kind of version of these statements where you're having to figure out like, okay, I'm reading between the lines here, like what exactly is it that they want? And when you see like prompts like these, you're really going to want to dig deeper into like the program description, the program goals, like making sure that, if they don't provide you a lot of stuff in the prompt, you can go to that opportunity, that organization, whatever it is, and try and figure out what it is I actually want. Right. And sometimes they will have they will expand on these things down below too as well. So it's always helpful to just not just look at the prompt, but if there's any other details around that. Right. Another thing you'll see, and this is getting more and more common, is that they're going to start breaking out prompts into lots of little prompts. So Noah Hollings, for example, used to have one big prompt, and now it's like 6 short prompts. And so in these cases, you like these, they're trying to make it a little easier on you in terms of like trying to tell you more exactly what they want. Because I think in the past they're getting a lot of just like a big spectrum of applications because the prompt was required a lot of interpretation and they were just like not really getting all the information they wanted. And so you'll see prompts more and more like this, I think, where it's like short answer questions. I think what's really important to keep in mind when you're looking at these ones is that when you're answering them, I think you want to make sure you don't overlap too much in different questions. So like, for example, with this one, if you look at like the second and like the 6th one, it's like, what is your motivation and how will you benefit? Like when I read those, I immediately was like, those sound kind of like the same question, right? Or like a lot of what motivates you is probably because it's going to benefit you in some way to do that, right? And so, yeah, I think it's just to think about how these fit together and then try and make sure that you aren't repeating yourself and you're making use of those characters effectively to convey your story and make your case. And then at the like grad level especially, you'll see more things like this, which are kind of more of the, I would think of like the traditional personal statement prompt, right? So this is for a grad program in the College of the Environment. And this is one where they're basically telling you to make the case for why you'd be a good grad student in their program, right? And so I wanted to use this one as an example of how we might try to look under the hood at what reviewers are actually seeing when you're seeing this prompt, right? And so to start off with, when I see prompts, I think the most useful things to do are to try to take that prompt, identify the key words, phrases, and things like that, and turn that prompt into like a question or series of questions you want to answer, and also turn it into like sort of a checklist. So like, what is it that they want from me, and what are the things I need to make sure that I hit throughout this, 2-page essay. So for that first question thing I like to do, which is like turning into a question, if I look at this, right, this bolded sentence here is really what is the crux of what they want you to write, right? So they want you to please use this section to explain why you think you will excel in our graduate program, keeping the above characteristics in mind, right? So sort of like your motivating question for the essay should be something like, why do you think you will excel? And that's helpful, but obviously they have a lot of other information throughout that. And so the second thing I would do is to take that information and break it down and try to turn into a checklist of what am I going to hit when I'm answering this central question, right? So if we go to the above sentence, these are the things that they highlighted, right? And so when you're answering like, why am I going to excel in this grad program? You also, in answering that question, need to answer or sort of give examples of things you mentioned, taking ownership, working independently and working in teams, and getting feedback, working through constructive criticism and getting better from it, right? So I think it's sort of like this scaffolding approach where you have this overarching motivating question that like really is the crux of the prompt, and then all the things that they want you to incorporate and give examples of as you're working through that, right? And the phrase here, like concrete examples, is really important, because like just being like, I take ownership of my research. If you wrote that in your essay, you'd be like, okay, like convince me, right? So that is like the sort of really important piece there. Let's see what I write down here for notes. Yeah, I think it's also really important to keep this approach really helps you make sure your essay is really targeted because reviewers are often be reading like, dozens of these applications. And so you want to make it really easy for them to see how you answered their questions, right? Like they probably you have a prompt and they have like a rubric. And so if you can really clearly lay out your argument you can even like use some of the wording directly from the prompt. They can really easily match up what you've written to how they're evaluating you. And it's really all about like making their lives easier in a way. Like, oh, okay, I can clearly see how this person fits our prompt because they clearly broke it down. Right. Any questions about prompts? Yeah.
So usually they have like max characters, right?
Yeah, yeah.
In general, is it better to just max the character limit or kind of just like fall a little under?
I mean, I would say you should use the number of characters that are going to make the best case for you, right? So I think you don't want to just like add stuff just for the sake of adding stuff. Because again, like if you remember how reviewers are reading lots of the applications, like if they're just like reading through fluff, a bunch of sentences that don't say much, they're going to be like, well, that was sort of a waste of my time. And they're going to lose the really important bits that you've written in sort of that sea of other things. And so, yeah, I think my advice would just be like to take the number of words or characters that's going to make your case, and there's no need to feel like you have to fill up the space, right? You also don't want to have like very, very little. That also would probably be bad, but like there's no need to feel like you have to take up exactly 2 pages, for example. Great question. What was your name, by the way? Sorry. Suji. Right. Okay. Thank you. And what year are you again?
I think like a junior. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. Okay. And like, what are the kinds of things that you're thinking of applying for in the near future that you're gonna have to write stuff for?
Honestly, I'm kind of because I already applied for this. I don't know from Michael, but there's a now like a student assistant for yeah, you got it. And I applied for that already. Future, I'm considering pre. So like this might be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think again, a lot of these things that we're talking about here are very transferable to anything you're writing.
Doing a scatter shot this summer.
Yeah.
Like 6
Yeah.
months pack from UW Marine Bio.
Right. Yeah. I remember those days. Cool. Any other questions about like prompts or strategies for understanding what reviewers want? Okay. I thought we could do a really quick exercise to try to practice this, just to take like 5 minutes or so. So I have a few printouts of an essay prompt that I would like you to work through and identify what is the question that you want to answer with your editor, and then what's the checklist of things you need to actually make sure that are being addressed as you work through that. Is there a pen?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't really have any, so I can offer you a whiteboard marker, but yeah, we'll just take like 5 minutes or so and we can go through this.
Oh.
You need to like find a silent face on it. Like, number.
Oh my gosh, is this the Noah Hollins?
It's the old one.
Giving me flashbacks.
Oh, sorry. Like one more minute or so. Was the question that you felt like you need to answer this essay? And my apologies to those of you who just come.
This wasn't exactly. I said, what's your motivation for applying for the scholarship? Because that's kind of in the last sentence, and like use this essay to, or this essay will be used to evaluate you and your motivation.
Okay. Oh, right now.
I said, it could be very vague, but I said, why am I eligible for the scholarship? Why do I need to get this too?
Let me rephrase that. What makes you qualify? For me, whenever I hear eligibility, I can go like, what's your year in school? And, like, what's your, because there's often like,
I think of like the things before you decide to apply, like, is it relevant?
Right.
right.
Like,
I think, yeah.
rising juniors and seniors only.
Right.
Learning sciences major.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay. What's your right now?
Said, how does your proposed project help you achieve goals that align with NOAA's mission?
Okay. What did you say again?
Proposed projects help you achieve goals that align with NOAA's mission.
Okay.
But I guess that does omit, like,
These are all many big parts of the thing, so
Yeah.
don't worry about that shit.
List after that.
Right. So, yeah.
I wrote 2 questions.
Great.
What are your specific or overarching long-term academic research goals as it relates to this mission?
Okay. Yeah, these are all good, and as you guys know, there's also like create a checklist that sort of. I think it's sometimes hard to try and summarize it in one question when they clearly want a paragraph, but what they want.
The second one was, what experience do you have with these? Yeah.
Yeah, let's see, I wrote down, what are your academic, research, and career goals as related to NOAA's mission, and what are your plans for achieving those goals? So I think sort of we're all kind of along the same track. I think for me, the crux of this is I think they're really pretty aware that, so sorry, background on this is people who are applying to like sophomores undergrad, and so they're pretty clear about like, hey, this is fairly goals focused and how you want to achieve those goals. And they explicitly mentioned like they want to hear about like why you've chosen that and what's your motivation, and they're evaluating you as an individual and a scientist. I think because it's very much like a forward looking thing. They're recognizing your point in school, and I think the crux of it is understanding your goals, motivation, and seeing you have like a plan of how to get there, right? So yeah, I think these are all sort of elements of that. What are things you wrote down as like part of a checklist that we maybe haven't gotten to yet?
Why do you choose your goals?
Right. Your goals. I'm gonna do each time from the office thing and just make things shorter once you just. Okay, what else do you have on your checklist?
And, I really, research their mission, because
Yes.
it's important to know what they're looking for in the next position.
Yes. What is it? Yeah.
Is it not?
What else do you all put down?
Like, national plans and background info, that was part of it, just like include those if relevant, I put in there, because, you know, you might not necessarily be considering.
Right, so I will note on that they, yeah, any grad school plans, none of the things that you write in these sort of essays you're finding. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think, like, when you're writing this, you're presenting sort of a vision of yourself and your goals, and obviously the next like 5 years change pretty drastically. And I think it's important to just keep that in mind, that you shouldn't like don't like lie about what you want to do, but like it's okay if you sort of tailor your goals or your vision of yourself to really fit what they want to hear from you, right? So I have like an example essay that I can hand you talking about later. It's from a grad student who's applying for a NOAA fellowship who did not want to work for NOAA. Not her goal.
And you just don't tell them that.
But she
Yeah.
told me she really did, and they gave her money.
Okay, that's.
So I mean, it's like it's not that, you know, it's she wants to work in the same space, but maybe not for the agency in particular. So it's like the bones of it are true, but if it's like if it's sort of a little bit tailored to fit prompts, I think that's okay. Yeah. Any other things for our checklist?
I had, I guess more background information, like specific examples of experience that you have pertaining to NOAA's mission.
Yeah.
And my checklist kind of just turned into an outline.
Oh.
Yeah. That's sort of your next
It's like
step. Right?
goals, how they relate to NOAA, how my studies help, grad school, why did I choose this, how will the internship help?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, let's sort of throw it out.
I said be more personal, because has like a, as in a class thing to
Yeah.
you took the crammers and stuff, isn't it?
Right.
I mean, maybe, yeah, I mean, with my friend kids specifically, because I know when I am applying, I'm like, you're gonna be working with other people.
Yeah.
Right.
So like, I love other people, I love talking to other people about what they do.
Communication.
Which I do, I just have to know a little bit.
I really, sort of be a storyteller when it comes to your experience. Yeah, and as your resume ever has.
Right. Narrative structure. We love a good narrative structure. Yeah, I think it's great. Yeah, you can sometimes everything I wrote down. I wrote down all these same things for a checklist, and then sort of CJ, as you're starting to mention, like things to keep in mind as you're writing the whole thing, because they also have like language in here that's specific, like not part of a checklist, but like clearly also they want you to, they say present yourself, your aspirations, your career goals in a concise manner. So if your question earlier, they don't want a bunch of extra stuff, right? They see that as something points out. They want you to demonstrate your organizational and communication skills. So typos, if your essay can flow up with no structure to it, minus points, right? I mean, those are just like generally things to always keep in mind when you're writing essays, but like in this case, it's like specific statement too. So it's like make sure that you keep those in mind as we're working through that. Great, yeah. So yeah, as you're saying, like the next step is how are you going to actually address all of these in an essay that flows, has some sort of story narrative to it, right? So that would sort of be where you go from there. Anyway, what's cool about this prompt and why I chose it is that the rubric is actually published, or I don't know if it's published, but if you ask around, you can find it. So like this was 30% of the application. Is it written clearly? Okay, right. So that was like the point about like, can this person write? And is it like organized well, demonstrating written communication skills? They want you to talk about your education plan and career goals. And importantly, they want them to be relevant to their mission, right? So that was a big part of that prompt. Hence, right in the rubric is that they have to relate. You have to state them, they have to relate to it. Does the applicant demonstrate interest in NOAA mission? Again, that same key phrase. And eligible to work in the NOAA workforce in the future, right? So like, again, this is sort of getting at your career goals, and eligibility to also, to me, starts to speak to like preparation, background, experience, things like that. Like, are they seeing that you're starting to develop the skills or get the experiences that are going to be required to work with the agency potentially in the future, right? So yes, NOAA's mission, what is it? Super important. So that was something that you'd have to keep in mind as you're writing that whole thing. Any questions about this stuff, or any thoughts or reflections, anything you want to share? Okay, right. So again, trying to take a prompt, figure out what the rubric's going to be. That's sort of like the game in some ways of trying to tailor your essays. Okay, I just want to start now and talk about some just good practices to keep in mind as you're writing the essays. Right. So we talked about like the prompt and what you did hit, but it's sort of like, how are we going to hit these things? How are we going to write something that's going to make our case and our argument the clearest? Right. So one thing you'll see in most personal statements is some sort of thing that grabs people's attention, right? Because again, remember how your reviewers are like reading a stack of these, a virtual stack of these, a digital stack of these. They're seeing so many of them over and over again. If your essay is somehow different or attention grabbing from the start, it's going to help you a lot in terms of standing out a little bit and being more memorable when they're writing that. All right. So you often hear something called like a hook of some kind. This is kind of many different forms, fashions, interesting phrases, contradictory phrases, a detailed description, sort of painting against something sort of like a narrative or story, something more vivid. A personal story or anecdote is always great as long as it's relevant in some way to the experience you're applying for. Sometimes like a good old topic statement can be good, right? Clearly stating like, I don't know, foreshadowing what you're going to talk about in the rest of your essay. And overall, something that's good is to keep in mind that, again, if it can be somehow unique or different, that's always plus points, right? So here are some good examples that I've pulled from different places. The first one is, the first two are not related to ocean marine stuff at all. The last one is from an essay I think I read. Right, so the first one is sort of this like contradictory statement, or sorry, not contradictory, but like interesting phrase. And then it was saying how like I was in this place where I was living like trash and I was settling for trash food, right? It's like, okay, as a reviewer, like, okay, that's kind of different. Like, where are we going with this? I kind of want to keep going. The second one is a little more plain, but like, I think a statement like that is kind of, if you're applying for an orthopedic surgery position of some kind, right? It's like, wow, I don't think most fourth graders are thinking about becoming orthopedic surgeons. So I kind of want to read about how, like, why are you like that, for lack of a better phrase. And this last one was from someone actually in my department, who was actually talking about her experience at Friday Harbor. So she was doing like field work outside and was all like, came in wet right before breakfast from being out since like 4 a.m. because that was when low tide was, things like that. And so like, this was the first sentence of an essay that she got a fellowship from as part of the application. And so like stuff like that, you're like, oh, okay, where are we going with this, right? So things like that I think can be pretty helpful and just grab some people's attention. And these are always really hard to write. I really struggle with these. I also put in some bad examples that I've seen or paraphrased. These are things that I read them and I kind of think like, okay, there's nothing really in there that tells me much about you. There are also things that people have seen lots and lots and lots of times before, that people are like really passionate about things, or like there's just things that and the last one, I wrote this one. This is terrible. I hate it now and I read it. But like these stories about like, oh, being super passionate, or like having this awakening of environmentalism, or like going tide pooling. gag. Like you just hear them so many times. No, I love tide pooling. Gag that I wrote this because I think it's sort of like it's just something that people have heard so many times before. It's like ever since I was a little kid, I've always loved the ocean. Okay, let's move on, you know? So yeah, I think it's like important just to remember that there are some things that we've heard a lot of time before, and often like passion isn't really going to be the thing that sets you apart from someone else because everyone in here loves the ocean or marine stuff or the environment in some form or fashion. That's just not that different or special about you. Sorry. So just things to keep in mind. Any questions or thoughts about hooks? And if you've written something like this before, don't feel bad. This was a grad application I wrote. So like this was like not that long ago. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is to make sure when you're writing these things and you're hitting those things in your checklist and you're answering that question, is to make sure that you're detailed, and that phrase from really like concrete examples is really good guidance for that. So I've heard this summarized as write an essay only you can write, right? So again, that first bullet is like, hey, you don't need to just restate your CV. That's not really that helpful. But instead, it's to expand on those things, the specific details of those experiences, things that you learn from them, the things that you contributed when you were put in that position. And also like thinking about, I think especially like in undergrad, you have like different random experiences. Like I worked in like as a prep chef for a while, or I worked as like part of my undergrad like at the gym, right? These are things that like maybe don't really seem super relevant at first glance, but I think personal statements are a chance to sort of tell reviewers about these experiences you've had, and the things that you learned that are transferable in terms of things like, I don't know, working independently or as part of a team. Like those are things. Yeah, there's ways you can like, pull out the glean the important bits from these things that might seem irrelevant. But again, it's really about trying to paint a picture, that is more than just like a listing of experiences, right? I think also when we're thinking about writing essay only you can write, and thinking also about like what you're going to bring to a program, I would say like don't be afraid to bring your lived experience into an essay. Um, Sometimes this can be pretty vulnerable, but I think that those really personal elements of it are going to be what people remember, right? So I think if you come across as just like a generic marine science or environmental science undergrad, that's not very memorable. And if you can somehow talk about yourself, and talk about, personal, social, cultural experiences, adversity you faced, things like that that make you somehow unique, those can be really, really helpful in painting that picture, creating that narrative, creating that story that's going to be much more memorable to a reviewer. So that's sort of on like the like writing the essay only you can write. And then I think also it's remembering that you need to make your case in this, right? So it's again showing your unique personality and telling the story of yourself, and then telling how the story of yourself fits with what they want in their program, right? So I think especially as an undergrad or when you're applying to grad school and stuff like that, you are at a point where you are looking for things to help further your career. And so I think they often want to know how this next step is going to help you achieve those long-term goals, right? So like, what do you want to get out of the program? How do you think it will benefit? What's unique about that program that you like wouldn't get in a different program, right? They want you to really explain like what it is that matches you with that program. Often mentioning like showing that you've done your research into the program, or like if it's like a grad program or like a REU, for example, there's usually listed like faculty mentors or other like scientists you could work with, showing that you've done your research and having like a clear vision in your head, even if it's, so again, not binding, but like those things, mentioning those things are really helpful in painting the picture for the reviewer of like how this program is going to benefit you and how it fits in with your plans. Okay, so to summarize these slides, I think it's really important when you finish a statement, there's like two questions you ask yourself. like, could someone else have written this? Like, if my friend submitted it, would it be mostly true still? And could you take this essay you've written or statement and give to some other program as part of an application? If answer to either of those is yes, then you need to revise your essay because it needs to be tailored both to you and to the application you're applying for. Right. Any questions? All right, let's talk a little bit about essay structure and how to fit all these things into an essay. So I think there's sort of two big structures for the essay that are pretty effective. The first is your persuasive essay, right? This sort of like thesis statement, paragraph supporting your thesis statement, giving evidence that support it, and then your conclusion that sort of summarizes it and often is more forward-looking, right? So this is a pretty familiar structure that we've all learned at some point and have been working with in some form or fashion for a long time. And so, yeah, this is sort of what I was just saying, right? So, for example, if we were to go back to one of the prompts we were looking at, when we're breaking it down, right? So, like, again, this was our question from earlier. Why do you think you'll excel? And then this is our checklist. And so, like, for example, if you're going to go with like a more persuasive structure, like you might have something like this, probably at like the end of your first paragraph, that lays out like why you think you'll excel, and basically what you're telling the reader. And it's good to have a structure that they can like easily anticipate because that will make it easier for them to understand how you're hitting their checkboxes. Is like you're hinting like, okay, I'm going to write a paragraph about my experience working independently in stressful environments. Then I'm going to talk about my belief in the importance of collaboration, and then I'm going to talk about my passion of learning. And in each of those things, I'm going to give concrete examples that support each of those things. I think the other big way that people structure their essays is to do it more chronologically. So Andy, this is sort of your point earlier, like having, this can be sort of a better way if you have like a story to tell. Not every essay is going to lend itself well to this. There's going to be some that you're going to, as you're looking at your checklist, it's like, I think there's like a clear way that I can lay this out chronologically, or it might be like, actually, there's like sort of arguments I want to make and pull things from different parts of my life into those paragraphs, in which case a more persuasive essay format might be better, right? So here, right, we're telling it in order, starting from the beginning. Usually, like these are, like the hook is going to sort of be some sort of anecdote or story about what it was that made you want to pursue this field. And then your arguments are sort of being built up chronologically of like how you got from that moment that you described in the beginning to the end, which is sort of where often you describe your future goals. And so, yeah, I think I probably use this more frequently, just because I think in terms of having a narrative structure, it flows a little easier. But like, again, it's going to be very specific to your personal experiences and also what you're applying for. So like when we're thinking about writing this and hitting our question and hitting our checkboxes, like these things all still have to happen in your essay, obviously, right? Like you can't, it doesn't mean that you can just tell a story about yourself and ignore the key parts of the prompt. They just need to make like they can just fit more clearly into a chronological order instead of like just being persuasive parts. Questions, thoughts, concerns?
I mean, I know that we talked about like individualizing your essay and stuff. Do you think that there's more benefit to the narrative structure because it's kind of like inherently learning rather than just kind of a 5-paragraph essay structure? Or is it more about like the content and not the format?
I think it often depends how much space you have sometimes. And I just feel like it's sort of like an it depends situation. I think one thing you can do is you can experiment with both, right? You can like take it apart, like all the things you want to say, organize them chronologically, or organize them like more persuasively, and see what's going to flow better. Yeah, I think you're probably right that generally speaking, having a chronological order to your story has inherently a bit of an easier flow to it. Um, but if it's going to bury some of the important things you want your reviewer to get from your essay, then that would be counterproductive, right? So, um, it just depends. And this is where you're just going to want to get a lot of feedback on from different people to see if they get out of it what you wanted them to get out of it. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, so I have some statements for you here that like this was a example of a graduate application I was telling you about for a fellowship that you can just sort of read through, and maybe if you have time or when you're writing an essay, you can sort of try to break it down and see um, how they satisfy the different things of the prompt and how they structure their story and how that worked for them. But we won't have time to do this right now. So I just want to conclude here with talking about, as I just mentioned, the importance of revisions and revising essays. So the best essays, they're always going to go through a lot of drafts. And the more important an essay is, the earlier you want to start and the more revisions you want to get, right? So like here was I don't know what I was applying for. Oh, I was applying for a graduate fellowship, right? So this was like my folder for that application. The first draft that I wrote was September 13th. It was submitted on October 19th. And through that process, I got lots and lots of revisions from different people, different initial different people's names, right? So like I was getting lots of feedback from different people and revising this repeatedly, so that when it came time for the submission deadline, I had something that had been, vetted and worked on lots of different people, so that I could be confident that I was conveying what I wanted to convey and that it was with the strongest possible format of that. Yeah.
Did you keep all of them because you wanted to like your past statements so you could go back to them, or?
All the versions in here.
Yeah, it's like I understand, like, if you give someone it, I always give people a copy because I don't want them to accidentally mess up my original. But yeah, why did you save so much?
I mean, I guess the basic answer is that they didn't really take up that much space, so there wasn't really a downside to keeping them. I think like I do kind of prefer, I like having different versions as different like snapshots in time, because my experience before has been like sometimes I'll make revisions and then we'll realize actually the version from 2 times ago was actually had a better structure, and there's actually like a different fix that we could have used instead of doing all these changes. And so if you have just that version history of a document, it's easy to go back to a version you like better, or if there's like something from the second version that you want to include in the 10th version, you can just pull that out and insert it, right? So I am well, I guess Google Docs has like a version control history. I don't love it. Yeah, so I just like to have a record of things, and I don't think it really hurts. So that's sort of why I kept it. Yeah, that's a good question though. I never really thought about it that hard.
My for those of you, like if I want to bother these 3 people, I want to give them a little time. You know what I mean? And just
I'll give people copies, and like it makes sense for me to like save someone's individual comments in a separate document. It's just I always don't want to bother.
Yeah, that's totally true, right? Because sometimes you'll be getting revisions in parallel, right? Like you have something, one of these people was like my advisor in grad school, and the person was like some other person I knew, and they got the same version at this different, same time. They gave my their edits back, and I could combine them into the new version, right? So that's a sort of example of me revising something a lot of different times and getting lots of different feedback, which is great. You can also use some strategies for self-revision that I think are helpful. So this was sort of to your question about structure. I think like what you can do is like make a reverse outline. What I mean by this is you have like your essay you've written, and you can sort of like create, if you read through it, like what are the topics of each paragraph, and what are the arguments you're making, and does it flow, and are the main points that you want it to be making actually coming through from that, right? You can do this yourself, or someone else can do it for you too. I have not personally done this part, but some people will literally take their essay and like cut apart the sentences and then rearrange them, right? So that can be if you're testing different structures. And also like if your flow really makes sense. Like if you cut up your essay and you throw it in the air and you mix it all around, like does it make sense what should go where? Just like seeing the segments of it. I think that can be helpful for like checking your narrative structure and your flow, making sure that like things are connecting clearly. And then yeah, checking for spelling, grammar, clarity. There's tools that help you with this, obviously now too. But like,
So for change the font.
okay,
Like your eyes are like, you get like used to what it looks like in the font, so like if you change it, suddenly you might realize. I haven't tested it, but I've heard that.
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
Sans was really what.
interesting. Yeah, I guess that's true because often if you're like you've seen the same sentence and this look it looks exactly the same many times, you just
Like,
read
you
it so
gotta say
fast.
from your essay, but if you change it, you're like, oh, you shouldn't be.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I've never tried that. Maybe I will. I'll start writing Comic Sans.
Don't turn it into.
Okay. So this is sort of like revising yourself when you're trying to get revisions from other people. I really think that the more people you can get, the better. Recognizing also that's kind of a big ask. So be considerate of their time when you're doing that. Um, and different levels of familiarity with your field can be really helpful because your reviewers may or may not be super familiar with what you're talking about in your essay. Um, and also like if you tended to like, someone, your cousin who's in some other field entirely, like can they still get what you're trying to say without having to understand all of like the jargon and things like that? So I think having people who are very familiar with the field who can be like, oh, actually, when you're describing this environmental problem, you're actually omitting a big part of the problem. Like, oh, okay, like that's really good to know, so I can make sure that if I have a reviewer who's really familiar, they will like see that I've clearly done my research. And on the flip side, if someone who's like not familiar with it can be really helpful for just being like, does my essay make sense to you? All right, can you follow it? Um, yeah, so I think for people who are really busy, give them lots of time, right? Like sending people stuff 2 days before to do is not a good strategy. 2 weeks before is probably a little bit better. Um, and then also I'll just note that like often you'll get back an essay and it's just like covered in red. Track changes is on and you're just like, oh my God, I think my essay was a piece of trash. Um, so I think when you get that, it's sort of a learned skill to take that in stride. Um, I think one thing you'll get better at with time is this idea of filtering feedback, right? Because again, with these essays, especially personal statements, like they're personal, they're your writing, they're your story. And if you feel like suggestions people make aren't in support of that, or they're changing your voice too much, or they're not quite saying what you want to say, you don't have to accept it, right? I think it's hard to do that at first, but as you get more confident, that'll be easier for you to sort of have that filter for criticism. Um, and this last bullet, I still haven't quite figured out how to do this, but trying to separate yourself from your work is really, I think, one of the key things for actually being able to take revisions and like being like, okay, this person's trying to help me. Like they're going out of their way to help me, and they have identified some flaws. And it's not like they think I'm a terrible writer. It's that like my essay could use some work.
Get really meta about it when you're talking about how good you are and something back. You're like, there were 16 drafts.
Right. I also want to just quickly note that there are resources for revisions on campus. There are people whose job it is to read essays and make them better. Um, so the Office of Merit Scholarships, Fellowships, and Awards has people who are writing advisors who can you book an appointment with them. It's like 45 minutes or so. They read your stuff. They give you drafts, feedback on those. And these are really for like I think scholarships and fellowships. So if you have like a I don't know 500 word essay thing for like an internship, it's probably not the source, but if it's like a bigger thing, fellowship, grad school, things like that, these people can be really, really helpful. Um, and then the Center for Learning and Undergraduate Enrichment Writing Center, they also, if you don't want to make appointments, you can just like drop in. And these people are general writing help, right? So as opposed to the first one, which is explicitly for scholarships, fellowships, and awards, the Clue Writing Center is really just like, hey, you have something that you wrote and you want to try to make it better. Let's work through that together. So just things to be aware of. Any questions? 228. Let me hand you guys this essay just so that if you time and you want to look through an example of this is someone who is a second or third PhD student, so they have a lot more things to talk about. That you would at this stage, give that money when reading it. And the prompt is able to back with some other notes about the review criteria. But yeah, yeah, I mean, I'll stick around here. Thanks for coming. And there are, I don't know if you saw in one of my emails, did I email you people yet? About like office hours that we're holding in this room. So like next week and the week after, I recruited a bunch of grad students to just like hang out and eat snacks. And if you have any questions, or if you have like an essay that you've written and you want feedback on, or a cover letter, or you just bring your CV, anything like that, the world's your oyster, right? So that'll happen next week and the week after in this room, Wednesday or Thursday, and I'll send more reminders about that.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank